Welcome to Burn the Rules with Chet Hirani. This podcast is for people who know leadership isn't about titles, noise, or ticking boxes. It's about how you think, how you show up, and how you perform when pressure is real. I'm Chet Hirani, and I work with leaders and high performers across business, sport, and life all over the world who want to take control of how they lead and perform. Not by copying someone else's rules, but by understanding themselves first. Every conversation here is grounded in experience, reflection, and practical insight. So if you're ready to question what leadership has been taught to be and decide what it means for you, you're in the right place. At some point in your career, someone on your team tried to be brave with you. They challenged something. They admitted something. They said the thing nobody else would say. And your reaction in that moment, whether you knew it or not, decided whether they'd ever do it again. My guest has spent 12 years inside some of the world's most complex organizations, watching that moment play out. She built an entire framework around it. Her name is Susanna Romantsova, creator of the Safe Challenger Method, Forbes 30 Under 30, TEDx speaker, and one of the most sharpest people I've spoken to on this show. This is Burn the Rules. Let's get into it. Hi, Susanna. How are you?
Hi, Chad. Hi. I'm great. Happy to be back, actually.
Yes.
on this
Oh my
podcast.
gosh. Thank you so much for being part of this. You are, like we've just basically said, one of the OGs. I'm going to just basically say that because when we had our first podcast, you was one of the first guests to come on there. And as soon as I contacted you to say, look, we're doing a rebrand, I need you on this show. And you just did not hesitate. And then you said, yep, sure thing. Huge supporter of everything that you do, following you for many years. We've known each other for some time now.
Yes.
And lots and lots of things have grown from your perspective, from my perspective, but just seeing your sort of growth sort of expand is just from the time where I remember you were still working with IKEA or IKEA.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
And then you kind of just left from there. And then now you're just doing this whole, some amazing things. But we will go into all of those sort of things. So first of all, Susanna, tell us what you've been up to lately, what's been happening, what's taken up your headspace, and just give us a bit of a background about who you are.
So what is taking up the space in my head? Actually, leaders do take space in my head right now.
Leaders.
Leaders, because I've been in this long-term cultural transformation project with different clients. And one of the organizations, I worked with them for the past 15 months. So I assist them on every stage of leadership development and this cultural transformation. So I meet those leaders every week. I'm going to meet them on Monday. I'm going to actually run a workshop for management boards. So I'm thinking now about the workshop, about these dynamics, about leaders, all their needs, objectives. This is something that actually takes a lot of space and my energy. But it's rewarding in a sense, it is.
Yeah, it is rewarding. I can so relate to everything that you're saying because I've done something quite similar to what you do in terms of providing sort of these workshops to leaders. The initial planning stages and putting everything all together, it's all in our head, but just to get it all down there and then to articulate things, it does take a lot of mental space, energy within ourselves. But once we've delivered, you're like, what? I feel good about myself. Isn't it? It's such a great feeling.
Yeah, it's fulfilling. At the same time, workshop is just the cherry on the top, right?
Yeah.
Because in order to deliver result, you need first to diagnose the problem well, right? Based on that diagnosis, you create the structure for the workshop. So then the workshop is just an experience of how to make sense out of those diagnostic conclusions that's been done before, right? So workshop should never be the goal in itself. And I think many companies misunderstand that. Workshop is just the tool of delivering the value through the interaction and experience. But it is demanding, physically and emotionally. Each session takes a lot of my strain and strength in a sense. Yeah, but seeing the effect afterwards, how people feel more supported in a sense and more aware of challenges and more equipped regarding the tools and techniques, that's very much fulfilling.
It's such a great feeling. And you kind of hit the nail on the head there as well. I mean, like workshops is just, it's just there to sort of deliver, to show the tools, the capabilities. But a lot of companies kind of tend to forget what happens after that, right? And it's really important. And that's one of the things I always say is like, it's all well and good hiring somebody or myself or yourself for these workshops, but we need to now discuss what happens after. How
Mhm.
are you applying everything that we've gone through? Because that was a challenge, that was your requirement. Now, what's the next stage? Well, how are you going to implement all of this? And so a lot of them don't have the answer to it. They're like, well, aren't you supposed to be here to give us the answer? It's like, well, yeah, I can, but we still need to have a plan in place.
Yeah, yeah, that's
So
very true.
easily forgotten, so easily forgotten. So you've worked with boards and leadership teams for the likes of Deloitte, DHL, Puma, AB. But when you walk into a room full of senior leaders for the first time, what do you notice in the first 5 minutes that most people miss?
Such a great question. 5 minutes. I pay attention how I feel. Actually, this is something people don't realize that when you are a stranger to them, those leaders in that room, they already have some kind of an established dynamics, right? So you're entering this established dynamics as a stranger, as an outsider. And those first 5 minutes and the way I feel during those 5 minutes being with them in the room actually is the first source of information, what works and what doesn't in this organization. Because when I feel threatened in a sense or defensive or not being welcomed, which is rare, but still, right? I kind of sense it, this tension in the room. Then it means it's a great source of information. We need to dig deeper into it and really understand what is behind that tension, right? On the other hand, there are cases when I enter and I just feel so welcomed and people are open and welcoming. Obviously, it's also a sign of a culture, right? So how leaders react to strangers, it's actually a very interesting sign of culture and the source of information for me as a consultant. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing because I kind of do something very similar in terms of as soon as you kind of identify all of those things, it's a sense of satisfaction that you've been able to identify it, but then you're like, right, this is a challenge and the challenge I accept,
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
like, right, because otherwise it'll be too easy. And I always say nothing should be boring, right? Because everything has to be challenging. And that's one of the reasons why you're there. You may be going into a room delivering or observing or consulting in any way, but they know you're there as the expert, but you're also there doing your research and observing everybody as well to then find that challenge, right?
Yeah.
Just to do that, it's amazing.
It's great how you emphasize this duality, right, of the role that being a researcher, so coming with hypothesis, right, not
Hmm.
statements. This is the first thing which I find super important. And the second one is this expert kind of expert's role, yet I prefer to call myself a guide, right, not a guru
Yeah.
in a sense, because that also helps us to reduce this kind of hierarchy and distance between us, right? So I'm not an expert, I'm a practitioner. I do things in practice and I bring this insight from other companies, other teams, other leadership groups to you, to this table, so you can actually have this distilled knowledge in front of you, right? And I'm gonna guide you through this process. I believe this distinction is subtle yet important in a sense.
Yeah, it is. I mean, absolutely. It's a great distinction between the expert and the guide. And I think we need to use those sort of terminologies a little bit more because even for us, going into something like this, there's pressure for us, right? It's like you're almost like an expectation that these people are looking at you thinking that this person knows everything. We've hired them. They're going to give us the answer for everything. But it's not always quite the case because they actually have the answer. We're just guiding them to find the answer for them. And this is where I want to ask you, so what pressure do people not see when they look at your position from when you go into things like this?
I believe the pressure to
Hmm.
balance this high credibility and expertise which I bring to the organization with compassion and empathy, because this is kind of the thing I believe that I discovered quite recently, that I'm there to empathize in the first place, and then to show them their potential to grow and to challenge them, and doing that simultaneously. So I care about you. I do deeply care about leaders I work with. At the same time, I see the potential for you to grow, so I'm gonna challenge you today, right? I don't leave you there where you are now, right? And this art of balancing credibility, expertise, kind of position in the room with the deep empathy and care for people, at the same time challenging them productively. This is the tension and the pressure and the art in itself, I believe.
It is. It's an art. You're absolutely right. It's just because I recall almost a year ago, I walked for a big corporation, and similar sort of, you almost felt the energy. You kind of like walk into this room and they're all just staring at you. And you've got to get used to those eyes on you, first of all, okay? Because you don't know these people. They're expecting these breakthroughs from you coming out. And I'm thinking, well, actually, I'm not here to give you the magic pill because I don't have the magic pill, right? I wish I had the magic
Yes.
pill, okay? But you have that, okay? And then we are now going to guide you and get you through that. And we're going to go through breakthroughs. And it is very much about empathy, because I have the experience, I have the answers just like you do, but we're now sort of going to empathize with these people over here to sort of listen and understand, what are you actually going through? And that's where another important factor is, where you've got to create a safe space for these people, because it's not an everyday scenario that they're in a training or a workshop like this, where what they will end up doing is going on it and continuing with their day jobs. Okay. It's creating that safe space for them, regardless of who's sitting next to them or who's listening to them, because everybody's in that one room and we all have that one thing in common. And we're here to actually learn, and we're here to actually become better people for ourselves. And that's our duty as well, to do something like that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Such a fantastic thing.
It is especially true in regards to the work I do, because because I teach psychological safety paired with productive challenge for high performance. So this is kind of a paradox, that you need to feel safe to perform and to be challenged, right? And at the same time, most of those leaders never actually experienced safety themselves, because they are always asked to provide safety to others, right? And to create safe space for others, but they rarely experience it themselves. Because if you take a look at the organizational chart, those leaders, senior leaders, they are in between, right? Between the demands and expectations from the management board and demands, expectations, needs, and challenges of their teams, right? And very, very rarely they are met as humans, as peoples who struggle, who need this empathy. At the same time, they also need safe space, because they cannot create safety for others if they don't experience it themselves, right? So this is kind of a job of mine, to let them experience something that they can then replicate in their teens, which I think is a magic in itself.
It is magical. You're so right. We'll touch on the psychological safety aspect of things, because I know that's your focus on later on in that. So you grew up across 3 countries and speak 4 languages, right?
I don't.
Does that actually change how you read a room and people that are inside it?
It's a wonderful question. If my background helps me, yeah, it definitely does. I think it's made me humble
Yeah.
in a way. Yeah, yeah, really humble in a way, right? Because I achieved things that generations in my family never achieved before. At the same time, I remember those beginnings, and I met so many different people from very different backgrounds, social, economics, cultural wise. I worked with diversity, equity, inclusion topics for quite some time. I met people from different marginalized groups, and I believe it made me a better human, a better person. And this kind of humility and better understanding that our background enriches us, but it does not define us. I believe this helps me with this work I do for leaders, right? Because this is kind of mindset that I also try to help them to adapt. That the performance is not just KPI delivery, right? Is also
Yes.
also unlocking the true potential of people, and you cannot unlock the real potential if you do not understand what is underneath the story a person brings to the room, right? So it's complex, but yes, I believe my background helps me a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting when you said the KPI side of things, because people are so hell bent on KPIs. Yes, we know they're there for a reason. They work. If they're used and applied correctly, which many organizations don't really do. We've all that, we've seen it. I've had KPIs and they've just been falling flat on the floor as well. Going beyond it is identifying their true potential and unlocking all of these sort of things from a performance level. That's the magic behind it, because that's where you're like, somebody can be like, well, you know what, those KPIs can stand there just a little bit on the side because I've just discovered something, or someone's helped me discovered something that I did not realize about myself. Okay. And that's when it's magical in there. And I'm sure you've been in situations like that where the unlocks just happen. Can you just give us an example of when that's happened and how that felt for you and these individuals?
I definitely experienced this potential unlock during my time at IKEA. I've been so lucky to have a team and my manager who really saw something special about me as the person and special about me as a professional. So my manager, she was supportive and challenging in a sense of my performance at the same time. So I believe that her attitude, she gave me so much freedom and responsibility. That helped me to unlock my potential. And I believe that that was a key milestone, like this, points of growth for me, being that team at IKEA. And IKEA is very special. I repeat it every single
Yeah.
time I'm on podcast because it is special, and I'm
It's
so
close to your
grateful.
heart, right?
It's the best company in the world. I truly believe so. I'm so grateful. IKEA gave me so much culturally and professionally wise, and that was the place that helped me to unlock my potential. So that's definitely my experience. And in my work with leaders, I see them having those aha moments very often during trainings in my Safe Challenger Leadership program. I have this module related to the potential, right? And in that potential, I discuss different concepts, mechanisms that may distort our understanding of other people's potential. And one of the concepts that I present is the Matthew effect. It's a well-documented effect telling us that those who already have resources, recognition, position will get more of that. And those who weren't that lucky and did not receive the recognition, high-stake project at the very beginning of their career may experience this cumulative disadvantage. So advantages accumulate. So it's like a snowball effect. If you got the chance to be on a high visibility project at the very start of your career, that will accumulate into further and further advantage. And then we as leaders, we judge potential based on those visible factors like the project, the network that we build. But those are usually consequences of that initial advantage, not of our potential. So when we dig deeper into that, and I have exercise with leaders when I ask them, think people on your team, right? What are situations that you would classify as the snowball effect situation regarding your teammates, those people who you believe may not have the highest potential? Are you able to actually see this initial disadvantage that they had in the company? And this is like aha moment when they realize that it's not about the person, but rather the project, the conditions, the context those people are in, right? And this
Yeah.
actually, in case of one of the company, changed the situation in the team, because the leader after this training got back to the team and changed the project makeup because of that person, to help them actually unlock that potential on different projects just because of that idea, that aha moment.
Wow.
It's powerful. The awareness, at least awareness, right? What we classify as potential, and if we may substitute the potential with some external context-related credentials, for example, right? Or the absence of those.
Yeah, it's interesting and it's quite powerful when you're in circumstances like that where it's not necessarily, as you said, it's about the individual, it's being aware about your surroundings and your environment. That is where the transformation can actually take effect. And because of that, again, going back to the snowball effect there as well, it's that it started with the environment, being made aware from the environment, the transformation took off. From then, it then basically had an impact on the individuals, which
Yes.
then in turn had an overall transformation and bettered people. So it's really powerful and great example of how you've basically said that. Can you just remind the viewers and the listeners of that model and the effect that you basically mentioned? It was the Matthew, what was it
Yeah,
called?
the Matthew effect. Yeah,
The
it's
Matthew
the Matthew
effect. Yeah.
effect.
Yeah. And yeah, if you aren't sure about what the Matthew effect is, reach out to Susanna. She will
I
basically
can explain.
help you and teach you about it. Well, she's an expert at it. But going back to a little bit about how much IKEA, and I'm going to reference IKEA a little bit too, because we first met when you're working there. But I have seen the growth in you as an individual too, from the whole sort of DEI aspect of things in IKEA to now what you've achieved. So I totally understand how you are so grateful for them, but then what you've actually done beyond that too. You've gone and you've gone and sort of achieved so many other accolades as well while doing these, and you're pretty much well renowned too. Okay, in that aspect, everyone knows. I mean, apart from me, there's a lot of people that know who Susanna is. So I wanted to give you some preps on that one as well, just to say how fantastic it's been to see your growth from that perspective too.
So much.
So look,
What?
you walked. You're absolutely welcome. So you walked into, let's say, for example, I was reading something a little about what you sent through, and you walked into a transformation for a management board of one of the largest organizations in Europe, head framework ready and everything. Okay, you had all of those sort of things, as well as a clear plan. Okay? But then you realize almost immediately it wasn't going to work for you. Okay, can you take me into that room and take us into that room and explain to us what actually happened there?
Well, working with management board is challenge in itself. It's a very specific audience to work
Don't we
with.
know it?
Yeah, for many reasons. The first reason is that probably those are the smartest people in the room. Like, honestly, they are the smartest. They're people who achieved so much and they put so much effort into their development and growth very often. Most of leaders in management boards I work with, they are self-made in the sense that they started 20, 25 years in the company they spent, right, starting from some internships, and then they developed into this, senior role. So I do pay credit to those people. This is the very first thing I want to emphasize. And this creates a challenge because those people have the feeling that they've seen everything, they know everything, they are capable, they're competent, and they're very self-confident, right? So this is a very specific audience you need to understand and empathize with. Yet, what most people don't realize that those are leaders just like any other leader in the organization who does not know what they do not know, right? So there is this kind of a gap between confidence in their own experience and overall knowledge. So there are gaps. There is very often this lack of intellectual humility that I discuss with them. There is a complete lack of insight into how they are being perceived by other employees. This is very interesting because there is this kind of gap between the intent and impact in their case. Intentions those people have on the highest positions in the companies, they're usually very positive. Like they truly want people to perform at their best. They want to provide them with resources. They want this growth and development and a nice culture. They truly want it. There are good intentions. Yet they do not realize how much their personality, their position, hierarchy, those status games and dynamics, public place, how much that distorts the reality and influence the perception. So the impact of the actions end up being very different from the intent they had at the very beginning. So there are so many nuances that I uncover in this work. So yes, when you enter this room, framework is not enough because
Yeah.
mostly they know all the frameworks. What they
Yeah.
do not know is they do not know themselves very often. That's very interesting. There is a very little introspection going on because they don't have time for the introspection. They do not have the inclination to introspection. Those are doers, very action-oriented people, which made them successful in the very first place, right?
Yeah.
Yet this gap between who I am and I know who I am and how I react and what I want and how I impact other people, this is something they are missing, right? So no framework will ever substitute for this introspection and insight. This is the one thing. The second thing is how I actually impact, how my behaviors impact other people development and well-being. And the third one, what kind of dynamic is going on in this management board. This is the very interesting thing I learned from the practice, that very often those management boards, they do not function as the team.
Right. Yeah.
Those just leaders who meet in a group and they perceive themselves as leaders of teams, their teams, but they never think of themselves as the team. So this is the third objective that I usually have in those meetings, to actually help them become a team. So to have an insight about themselves, to improve interconnection and relations with other employees, and to become a team and being a management board. And that's not that easy.
It's not. I mean, that's fascinating as well, because you alluded to the fact that there's the traditional forms of leadership. Yeah. When I talk about traditional forms of leadership, I always refer it to the old rules of leadership, because you get to a certain position, and as you said rightly, there's a reason why people get to a position, and hats off to them. They've worked to get to those positions. Sometimes it's not sometimes, not saying it's the right or wrong way of getting to the top, but they've managed to get themselves there because they've thought to themselves that they're good enough to get there. So they've done it. Or sometimes you get people who have been there for many, many years in an organization, and they just feel that they deserve it. Okay. And usually those people aren't the right leaders. Okay. But they can become good leaders by implementing things that, like what you've just basically said. Yeah. Where it's thinking about themselves, but then when they're thinking about themselves, almost leading themselves first, and then realizing, hold on a minute, I'm just not here for myself, but I'm also here for the team too. Right. So there's very much, there's a lot of, hence why this podcast is called Burn the Rules. There are lots of rules that you need to almost like eradicate and just say, hey, look, that's no longer in existent anymore because it doesn't work for me. I need to think of it from another dynamic, more putting myself first, and then also then my team. Yeah. So we
That's
also,
very
as
true.
leaders, also have to adapt to those sort of areas, right? So at what point did you realize that the usual way of leading and what you've seen wasn't actually working for you when you were delivering, or for yourself too?
We need to define the usual way of leading, because actually
Yeah.
people, I believe, lack those definitions. They just do things with their gut, in a sense, right? And then they call it some kind of leadership. But when you ask them actually based on what principles do you lead, they are unable to articulate those principles, right? So I believe the very first thing to remember is being conscious and, very determined in a way. What are your principles? What are your principles? Right? And to me, that's definitely empathy, that's for sure, and challenge. And those two, because I want, as I mentioned, people to really feel safe at the same time stretched. So those are two, and I believe very often leaders in organizations are unable to hold the tension of those paradoxes because they never practice to hold tension inside themselves as well, right? That's why they avoid conflict, they avoid giving feedback, they avoid changes, basically, right? They are very resistant to change. But as I observe organizations right now, 90% of companies I work with are going through some kind of transformation. So the change is unavoidable in a sense. And there's so many challenges, so much pressure. That is why I believe that leaders should start with building this groundedness, right? And inner stability. This is something I also covered on my YouTube channel because this is a new thing I started. And there I focus on inner state of a leader, first and foremost, because when you are grounded and you are stable internally, you can hold the tension for yourself and for others. And then you can balance and pair psychological safety with this productive challenge. And this balance will help you also to face those external threats and challenges. So those are my principles. And I believe the thing that I uncovered is this tension and the ability to hold both truths simultaneously. Right.
Yeah.
This is not that obvious. It wasn't that obvious for me before.
Yeah, I mean, it takes time, right, to actually start understanding and knowing it. And it's really interesting when you said that when you ask somebody what are their principles and they don't actually have an answer to it. But um, if they don't have an answer to it, it's still not saying it's the wrong answer. They may just not have found it. So it's like, okay, now let me go and help you, guide you to actually find your principles. And then that will make you the better leader or the greater leader that you actually really want to be, as opposed to just being called a leader from that side. Yeah.
Yep, that's
But
true.
also, if yeah, and also make sure you do check out Susanna's YouTube channel. There are some great episodes on there. With that being said, so I'm going to go push back. I'm going to push back on you a little bit here, okay? Because we mentioned about psychological safety earlier on. Okay, now from what I see, and again from what I read as well, psychological safety almost has like has a reputation problem in my
Mm,
perspective.
it does.
And when I say that, I'm saying things like a lot of hard-nosed leaders hear that term and think soft,
Mm,
slow, people sitting in a circle sharing feelings. That's what they think straight away. I'd love for you to make a case, right, for everybody to understand why they are so wrong in thinking that.
sure, I'd be happy to, because there are so many myths around
Yeah.
psychological safety, right? It's so
Uh,
widely misused and misunderstood, unfortunately. So first and foremost, psychological safety is our shared belief that this space we are in, team, organization, this meeting, is safe enough for me to take a risk. So this is the definition introduced by Amy Edmondson, who is a Harvard professor and a researcher of psychological safety. I believe it's safe to take a risk. So I can ask you uncomfortable question. I can admit my mistake. I can share something vulnerable or personal to me. I can disagree with you. In order to take this interpersonal risk, I need to feel safe. What means safe is that you won't reject me. You won't tell me I won't ever invite you to this podcast again if you disagree with me.
I'm already thinking of another episode. So you're invited.
You see, this is psychological safety in action. You see, you're a role model, chat. Thank you. Thank you for that. So psychological safety by definition is about the risk taking, interpersonal risk taking, and about courage. It has nothing to do with comfort, quite the opposite, because Amy Edmondson, during her extended research, she found out that psychological safety goes hand in hand with performance accountability. She defined this 2x2 matrix. I know if you saw it, it's that on one axis we have psychological safety, and here we have performance accountability. When
Yes.
we have psychological safety and high performance accountability, we end up in learning zone. If we have high psychological safety but low performance accountability. We end up at comfort zone where nothing new is being invented. People do not bring any disruption, innovation, creativity, just comfy, and there is no great results there. So argument was always that it has to be paired psychological safety with performance accountability. And experiments she ran in different pharmacological companies with different teams, it all confirmed this hypothesis that high performing teams are those teams that have a high performance accountability and high level of psychological safety. So psychological safety is about our risk taking, our ability to be courageous in our relationship, in our conversations, without the fear of rejection or punishment or humiliation. It has nothing to do with comfort. Quite the opposite. When it's psychologically safe, I have teams that have high level of psychological safety. Those teams, they actually are able to have a very hard conversations. They are challenging each other, they are
Surprising, right?
this is not the most comfortable place to be in psychological
Yeah.
safe team, because you are never actually prepared what this discussion will bring up, in this kind of exchanges. So yeah, it's nothing to do with comfort.
Yeah, see, there you go. That is basically case has been served in that respect. It is a myth, okay? So it's none of everything that everyone sort of sees. It's important. Psychological safety is more than just soft, slow people sitting in a room sharing their feelings. Yes, that's all part of it, but there's more to it as well. So it's very much of a myth in that respect, and it's very important. Okay. And it's interesting when we talk about psychological safety, we are not just only talking about things which are in organizations. This is happening all around us. Yeah. It's happening in our own homes. It's happening with us ourselves individually. Okay. Exactly what, like Susanna, you mentioned, is about the risk factor, that you're now in this position where you're able to take the risk because you're safe. Yeah.
Exactly. This is the
And
essence. Yeah.
that's the essence of it all. Exactly that. So just to remind everybody, if you ever hear psychological safety again, do not turn your nose up on it. Actually pay interest in it. But before you pay an interest in it, I would also suggest that everybody should potentially think about their own psychological safety before thinking about anything else around them as well, right? Um, because that's what will help them take them to the next level. That's what will help them effectively allow them as well to take the risk that they need to take, or a doubt that they potentially thought that I can't do this. But in truthfulness, you probably can if you put yourself in a safety zone, right? And you think about those sort of things, right? It's a
Beautifully said.
powerful way of thinking it.
To be
Yeah.
kind to yourself as well, right?
There you
This is
go.
so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. So you said silence is one of the biggest indicators of low psychological safety. Yeah.
It is.
Can you say more about that? Because on the surface, a quiet room looks like a calm room, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So could you tell us a bit more about that too, please?
Silence is the very first indicator, especially in the situations when you present something important, something controversial, or maybe something new, and then you pause and ask this question, what do you think? And if there is a silence, it doesn't mean alignment or agreement. It just means that there are many options. People are disengaged. They feel like it's pointless to raise concerns or present a different point of view. They may be afraid of possible consequences if they do disagree with you, but it's impossible for the group of people, the best minds on the market that you employed, it's impossible to align and agree on high stakes decisions. Because imagine the room of the most competent people, right? They come from different backgrounds. They bring this cognitive diversity to the room, different skill sets, different life stories, different competencies. And how is it possible for them so easily to agree and align, right? It's just impossible. So if you are presenting something really important, new, innovative, and you face this silent room, this the very moment you should ask the room, what are we silenced about?
Yeah.
This is the
Yeah.
question, right?
Yeah.
Needs to
Yeah.
disrupt the silence and never settle with silence, because it may have different origins. Silence may be in these fear-based cultures as
Hmm.
like just a defense mechanism, but silence can also be a part of this fake harmony cultures, which we rarely talk about, that people are driven by this artificial positivity all the time. So they're afraid to question the status quo or disagree with you because they do not want to decrease your interactions, the quality of your relationship. They do not want to harm this harmony. So they're going to be silent. So some companies believe, and leaders, that if they are not fear-based, then they are psychologically safe. That's not the equation. You can have no fear and not be psychologically safe because you preserve this fake harmony, and people are silent not because you're genius and your strategy or idea is genius. They are valuing this relational capital so much in this company that they are afraid to damage it, in a sense. So you have also to be aware of those nuances, I believe.
Yeah, I believe that you get quite a lot of that though in organizations too, because people are fearful of speaking up and losing their jobs, especially in different cultures. Yeah, because I've noticed that a lot with working around different countries, that people, the first thing in their mind straight away is that I can't say anything because I'm fearful of losing my job. I was like, but what about speaking up to actually improve your job rather than being fearful of fearful of losing your job? But it's not really fearful of the individual. It's not fearful of losing the job. It's actually being in being fearful of an individual who is potentially their
Exactly.
manager. That's what
Exactly.
it actually is.
Yeah.
Where again, things like where you come in and you explain and you guide and teach these managers of how to sort of work collectively as a team. And usually, going back to what we said before, is that those leaders need to understand the value of why they're a leader, because they also have teams. Yeah.
True.
So it's very,
It's
very,
true.
very true in that. Very true. So a question that I always ask all guests on the podcast, okay, hence the title of the podcast. What's one rule you've burned for yourself and realized you're now in control after burning it?
I keep repeating this rule because there is this golden rule of treating others as you wish to be treated, right? And I burned that rule and replaced it with the different one, treating others the way they wish to be treated. And I believe this is the totally different level of leadership, because you need them to have an insight, right, into their needs and objectives. You need to step outside your own bubble of how things should be and truly empathize with that other person. At the same time, you also need to realize that those people need three things actually people need. They need agency, they need competence, and they need relatedness. Those all three are components of this self-identification theory, which I use in my work with leaders. And when you start treating others as they wish to be treated, you provide them with agency, you create space for competence, and you show the highest level of relatedness and belonging. And this is, I believe, the new rule I
Mm,
use with leaders. I enter the room and I try to treat them the way they want to be treated. Not that industry tells us how to treat them, how to educate them, how to enlighten them. It's all about superiority of some kind. I
yeah,
hate that, to be honest. I'm
yeah,
there to partner, to guide, and to support, because I believe they already possess the wisdom they need. They just need, the guidance, how to unlock and use it.
yeah. Such a beautiful way of saying it, because you said to treat people how they want to be treated. And when by just repeating those words, you almost, like, for me personally, is that when I'm repeating those words, it's like I'm trying to understand, and that's the best way of understanding the individual's needs straight away. And as a leader, you put those people first sometimes before you put yours in that specific scenario. Yes, in a leadership perspective, you need to put yourself first in certain areas too. But when it involves with people, you need to understand what they need, and you don't know what they need. No one's going to speak up. Again, going back into a position of creating a psychological safe space, you are going to get everything that you possibly need to help that individual, because they're the ones that are going to open up and tell you what they need.
Exactly.
And that is such an important thing, where you just put all of those things together. And it's important to sort of remember those. So it's such a great rule that you've burnt, and now you're in complete control of it. So I absolutely love that. Thank you for
Okay.
sharing. So we're just going to move on to a little bit about sort of things to do with sort of controlling under pressure. Yeah. So you talk about sort of small behaviors destroying trust, for example, things like, let's say, sending Slack messages out at 11 p.m. I know a lot of people that still do those sort of things. I'm sure you do as well. But what's one behavior you see leaders doing regularly that they have absolutely no idea that it's eroding safety in their own time, on their terms?
There is one domain. It's not just one behavior because it depends. I'm going to explain it. But domain that leaders are completely unaware of. Yet, this is something I discovered in practice. I never read it in any books. I just saw it firsthand in practice in different companies. So domain is our reaction to courage. And behaviors may differ because some leaders have this reaction of withdrawal. So they have this flight reaction defense mechanism. So when someone comes to them with some act of courage, for example, asking difficult questions, disagreeing with them, admitting mistake, this is an act of courage, extreme courage. Some leaders tend to withdraw themselves. They escape the conversation. This is the first scenario. There is a second scenario when they fight. So their defense mechanism is to be aggressive in a sense, right? To say that you made mistake because you are not competent, or this should never ever be repeated again, or something like that, right? So they fight. That's their reaction, and they have in their mind such high standards, but it's just the intolerance actually for ambiguity and vulnerability. So it's a spoiler. And there are also leaders who are very cynical in a way, right? So people open up, they are being courageous in front of them, and they joke around, right? They are being very sarcastic in their comments, they undermine this courage. They never ever say that this is a courage, right? They never admit this vulnerability. They just joke around because they do not let themselves to be courageous and vulnerable. So they block this courage in others. So from my practice, this was again my insight in this work with leaders in the field, that there is a key moment when a person comes to you for the very first time, and that person does something courageous, and your reaction to that courage will determine everything. Everything. Because they never gonna come again if you reacted in this defensive, aggressive, or skeptical way. They will never ever come back to you. So that was my aha moment
Wow.
in a sense, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you've given me that aha moment, because I'm actually thinking of when was I ever in that situation, or when have I seen those sort of things. Wow, that's fascinating. Wow, you've got me lost for words in that respect. That's really good. That was quite deep, but really insightful.
Not very happy to hear that, but think even wider in a sense. Leaders,
Hmm.
this is a one audience, but we have also parents and kids, which
Yeah,
the same
true.
is true for them. We have our partners, our families, our friends, and our reaction to courage, productive reaction to courage, which is first thing, seeing the courage and be grateful for that courage, saying thank you for being courageous, then being curious about that, what exactly happened. And the third one is productive reaction, saying in a sense, how can I help you? How we can fix it? How we should proceed? This is the universal truth around different life domains, at work and at home. Yeah, this is so powerful. When I realized that it's so universal in a sense,
It
I
is.
actually, yeah. I try to practice what I preach.
Yeah,
I
no,
try.
it's true. I mean, it's really, I mean, the fact that you were able to sort of observe that and see that, and then just like almost like a aha moment for yourself, right? And I think, you know, what's one thing's really important. I think they need to, well, I can talk about this a long time, for another episode, for so to speak, but they don't teach this to the younger generation, you know, and you start wondering, when will they learn this? And a lot of people, a lot of young generation kids and everyone, they might not never learn this, you know, and with all the changes that are going on from a technology standpoint, social media standpoint. But this is something fundamental that I feel that needs to be sort of almost implemented in the education system, so to speak. I mean, it doesn't even have to be a topic to talk about. It should just be implemented in the way of the teachings, for example, you know? So, because that's where they learn. Okay. And I mean, we can all say parents need to basically, I mean, parents are a great one to actually speak to their children from that and then take this practice and do these sort of things. I, for one, do all of these sort of things as it is anyway, but that's because it's my background. Yeah, not everybody's like us. Yeah. They won't understand that. And or they are doing it, but they don't understand what they're doing to improve it in certain ways as well. You know? So I honestly think this needs to be a bit more sort of a message needs to be sent out to and for the younger generation. What do you think?
I absolutely agree with you. Moreover, this is also the mission that we both have, I believe,
Yes.
because our work often gets misunderstood in a sense, right? Because consultants, usually external consultants, coaches, they are usually perceived as those people who just come, give a talk, right?
Yeah.
Get paid,
Well, it's just
tell
another
some
just another
yeah,
consultant, you
tell
know?
some
Yeah.
universal truth, and that's all. But the reality is very different because look, I've been thinking about that for some time, for quite some time. So all organizations care about is performance, right? Agree? Agree. Now, as I study the psychology of performance at Barca Innovation Hub, it's a different topic, but I study the science of performance. And I discovered that there is a very little knowledge in the organization what performance is actually about. So this is kind of a paradox. Organizations care about performance. They never studied performance. They do not know how performance is being created because there are two things. You need resources and demands, and you need to find equilibrium between resources and demands. If you enter any organizations right now, any organization, they will never tell you what is performance, right? Yet they care deeply about it. At the same time, they have leaders. Leaders are the drivers of performance, yet they are underinvested very often. They do not have any learning resources. This is the case. They don't have time for learning and development. And this is kind of ridiculous because you take any athlete, how much you invest in training of the athlete for them to
Yeah.
perform. But in organizations, you required to perform, to perform, to perform, and then maybe you have 2 hours of workshop or training, right, somewhere at the end of the business year. And now coming back to us being coaches, consultants, we're people who devote our career, time, resources, energy to actually understand what performance is. And we get back to those organizations, saving them time, energy, and very often money, showing the shortcuts, giving the knowledge that are missing there. So I believe our role is extremely important yet misunderstood. At the same time, the level of this ridiculous approach to performance in organizations has to also be realized in a sense. So yes, true what everything that you mentioned about the need for this knowledge, but there are also some mechanisms that need to be changed for that knowledge to be actually leveraged and spread.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny when you said that the word high performer came into mind, right? And when people say, yes, I'm a high performer, but what does high performer mean too? Right? You start thinking, questioning that too. If you don't know what performance is, and other people may think, well, performance is me hitting my targets. Yes, to a degree. Yes, it is. But how are you doing these sort of things? What are you doing to achieve all of these sort of things. Oh, I'm working really hard, but okay, you're working really hard to get to these levels, but what else is there that you're doing? There's another layer. And that layer just never really gets even acknowledged in organizations, right?
Absolutely. And one more thing I'd add to what you just covered is the sustainable aspect of that. Because you can hit your goals, your targets here and now in this quarter and be never able to replicate those results. Will that be a performance? Will that be a sustainable performance? It won't be, right? So one thing is the performance itself, but the second one is actually how to unlock this essence of sustainable performance. So I can repeat those exceptional results over and over again. And we as organizations know our drivers of sustainable performance, and we are able to build this system of great results being replicated. And do organizations have those insights? I don't see any examples of that.
Well, they probably say they do, but there's just it's just gathering dust somewhere, to be honest. And then it brings people out here like us to actually highlight these sort of things, and it's almost like a safety mechanism. It's like, no, we do have it, we don't have it, but really, you do have it. You just need to understand how to unlock it. And as we're
Exactly.
talking about performance, I'm looking at people always question me, why do I have so much Lego in the back, right, in the
Mm.
background? Okay. And there's a reason why there's three cars there. Not, yes, I love Lego, but performance is related to all of those three things there. Yeah. And there's a story behind why that's there. Okay. Because that's performance driven. Formula
Mhm.
One. Okay. When you said being an athlete, but there's so much strategy and mechanism behind it all. One day I will explain to everyone why those three are specifically there.
I'm looking
Okay. And if,
forward for that. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, if anybody wants to know, they can just ask me the question. I might just be able to just record another episode, maybe a solo episode and do something like that. But
Yeah, that's very interesting.
we can talk about performance and those sort of things for a long time. But Susanna, you have something called, and we mentioned earlier on, called your safe challenger method. And this has three pillars to it, right? Trust, insight, and clarity. When you yourself are under real pressure, which one of these is the hardest to hold on to for yourself?
Brilliant question, actually. I believe under pressure, trusting yourself is the hardest. Yourself, because you're unable to trust others if you don't trust yourself. So I believe this is a foundational skill and the hardest to develop under pressure. But this is the one that changes everything. Having this inner core, as they call it, because trusting yourself is basically about having this well-defined and stable inner core. It's my principles, my practices, my rhythm, right? It's everything around this intercore. And this intercore makes us anti-fragile, according to Nassim Taleb, right? Because then we can be flexible, we can respond to the changes in the environment, because here is one thing which is stable is me, right?
Yes.
And other things can change and differ, yet one thing is stable. So trusting yourself, I believe, is most important, yet the hardest to build and practice under pressure.
It is the trust factor. I mean, it's so hard. We can say that you trust somebody, but do you trust yourself? And if you're not able to ever answer that question, then you need to go back and find out, how can you trust yourself? And it's a question that we don't usually ask ourselves. Okay. How
That's
much
true.
do I trust me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, just saying those words is powerful enough to have an impact. So I would strongly recommend anybody who's watching and listening to this, ask that question for yourself first. Yeah. Do you trust yourself? Okay. And then just take a moment. You don't need to have a right answer to it or an immediate answer, but take a moment and actually figure that out first. Do you trust yourself? Okay, because you trust somebody, but do you trust yourself? That's an important one in all aspects.
It is. And you know what is fascinating? Because once you reflect upon that question and find probable answers to that, let's imagine I don't trust myself completely, it would be your answer. And then you ask the magic why, start with why question. And what you reply to this why question will actually define what you are missing in relationship to your team, or to other professional domains. Because if you tell yourself, I don't trust myself because, for example, I miss the direction or clarity under pressure. That's exactly what your team is missing in your leadership,
Yeah.
right? Or you tell that I become chaotic and over emotional and I cannot control the surrounding. This is exactly what your team is struggling with in your leadership. So this is a basic yet powerful question to answer, because that will make things clear to you in sense what you are missing to become a safe challenger, a person who is able to pair safety with challenge for this high performance for themselves and also for their teams.
Yeah. Yeah. Such a powerful thing. I mean, I'm gonna go away and even ask that question to myself when I'm in my own space too, you know. It's okay because when you can be doing something what we've been doing for many, many years, there are elements that, yeah, you do trust yourself, right? But even if you get to that point, you still should be asking that question to yourself. It's not a one
Really
question and done sort of thing. It's a continuous question. Self-reflection. Yeah. It's just doing
so
those
true.
sort of things for
Yeah,
yourself, right?
yeah.
So
Beautiful.
you changed your mind about what strong leadership looks like from having the answers to creating the conditions where better answers emerged, for example. What did that transformation feel like for you inside? Because that's not something which is a small shift for someone like for yourselves who led this all in IKEA, for example. So how did this actually feel for you inside?
It feels like containment in a sense that you feel fulfilled. You do not need to prove anything to
Mm,
anyone. You know what you know, and more powerfully, more importantly, is that you know what you do not know. That's most important part, I believe. Knowing that your knowledge is limited and your perspective is limited, and you are here to learn from others and share, because sharing is caring. Yet never assume. I believe that's again, we're coming back to this intellectual humility, because I believe this is the driver of a great leadership, and this is something that I learned over the years, something that was a part of my evolution as a leader myself, being intellectually humble, knowing what you know and what you do not, and never assuming, having hypothesis and finding confirmation or the way to reject the hypothesis. I believe that was a shift for me.
but it could have been, I mean, that again takes time. But that shift must have felt so good to understand it. Again, it's unlocking things for
It takes
yourself.
so much pressure down.
Yeah.
Chat.
Yeah, but it does.
When we are very demanding towards others, it means we
Yeah.
we have some, I don't know, inner void in a sense. When we are never satisfied with others, it's probably we're never satisfied with ourselves, where we are too demanding, too strict with our team members. Again, it narrows down to our personality. And once
Mm,
you improve yourself in relationship to others, you automatically become kinder to
yeah.
yourself, right?
Yeah.
And you have so much energy being freed out because you do not hold this tension anymore. You do not need to prove anything to yourself or others. You are
Mm.
the open mind and you are here to learn and not to reject, evaluate, punish, or assume anything about everyone. So it's a great development tool, actually, intellectual humility it is.
Yeah. And it's interesting because that doesn't even have to necessarily be directly related to your work in what you do. It could be extracurricular activities outside. Classic examples would be like going to the gym, for example. Yeah. I know for me personally that I need to basically go to the gym every single day because it's just unlocking things inside me where when I come back, I'm the better person that I was. And I did the experiment on myself by not going for maybe 2 weeks and then realized how I was behaving, the sort type of messages I was sending in terms of how my work was, how I was talking to people around me. And then when I went back to it, yes, it was hard because my body got so used to not going. But when I went started going, it hurt. I was in pain, but I started realizing and noticing the shifts immediately. You know, and when people do say this, it actually does work. It's not. This is not. We're just not saying this for the sake of saying it. Okay, you just have to apply it and do things about it.
And that's a great example because this is the same cycle leaders experience. And the gym is actually a great example because we take upon any challenge. We have this in state of arousal, emotional, intellectual, physical. Then we need to release the tension. To some, it may be physical activity. To some, it may be meditation. To some, it may be, some social activities. We need to release and then assimilate. This is a cycle. We all function in cycles, but most leaders, they do not have time, intention, knowledge of this rhythm, and they miss this second or third step. So they have arousal. They do not have release moment and they do not have assimilation and reflection moment. So they in constant arousal until they collapse. Or they
Yeah,
team collapse.
yeah,
And this is a huge problem actually. And to some, gym may be the answer, but at least having this understanding that this is how human beings operate, this is how we function. We are biological creatures. We function in cycles, and this is something companies never teach you about, right? You need to actually dig deeper into this performance science, psychology science, to realize how you need to structure your work also outside the work.
very true, very true. It is, and I mean, a lot of it is all. It's all related. When you hear the differentiations between personal and professional lives, I believe it's not. It's just one. Everything collides together. There's not a separation because it has a link into it. And at the end of the day, you only have one life, right? You don't have two different lives. You got one
Yeah,
life. So
yeah,
think of it
that's
from
true.
that perspective.
That's true.
So you said that 70% of team performance depends on the leader. And that's a pretty heavy stat when we think about it. Okay. What's one thing a leader can change in their own behavior effectively this week? Let's say, for example, this week that would immediately shift the dynamic for their team.
Yeah. The first thing is this reaction to courage we discussed. I believe it's easy and extremely practical. The second one is to start asking questions, and not just questions where and why, but the thinking type of questions. Meaning that if you see a person on your team struggling with the task or with the project, try to initiate this digging deeper into the reasons, meaning that what you think is the bottleneck, right? What you think is the reason why you struggle. If they make mistake, what we learn from that, right? So it's kind of a different type of questions, because I actually recently came across the research that says that the questions are the easiest tool for us as leaders to actually decrease defensiveness and resistance on our team. Because when we operate and lead with statements, right, we trigger that agency, competence, and relatedness that I mentioned before. But when we lead with proper questions, we can actually build rapport more easily. So I would say two things. Well, first one is this reaction to courage, and the second one is better questioning. I believe this is easy and undervalued, unfortunately. Yeah.
It is. Questioning is undervalued. You should be asking. You should be curious. That's what you should be doing. Yeah. So the listener is the leader in this respect. Okay. They're probably listening. Listeners here and people watching here are probably listening to this thinking that their team is already high performing. Yeah. Okay. What's the one question they should be asking themselves that they're probably not?
Let me think about it. Question that they are not asking. If they assume their team is performing well, I would ask them to define this well, in a sense, right? Because this is the summary of our conversation today. Because this well has to be sustainable. This well has to be not only quantitative, but also qualitative. This well needs to build agency and relatedness and better safety and challenge in the team. So I would really try to challenge this well notion that leaders may have and truly understand what is behind this well, And if they see any obstacles to truly high performance, then I believe it's often the issue of good definition, because that good definition has to come from obviously companies' objectives and strategy, but also those leadership principles that we discussed earlier. What I believe in and what I want my team to believe in. And do we then breach our principles, our beliefs, our values with this definition of performed project or task? I would really pay close attention to that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So remember that if you are saying that your team is already high performing, okay, question that you're probably not asking yourself is define what does well mean to you and what is well? What's happening with this well? Okay, because usually that will give you the answer what you're not doing. Right. So before we wrap up, we've got a little quick game that we're going to play. Okay.
Okay.
It's called 10 and Done. Okay. So it's 10 questions, short answers, no thinking, and the first thing that comes to mind. Okay.
Okay,
Are you ready
let's
for this,
try.
Susanna?
Always ready.
Yeah. Okay. Question number 1. What's your most used phrase at work?
It depends. That's easy. I
That's
overuse
a
it.
great answer. Yeah, that's brilliant. What's a habit you've kept for years?
Being kind to myself. That's a habit.
What's one thing you're irrationally strict about?
My discipline. It's very rational. I'm not sure if it's irrational, but I'm strict about the discipline. I believe that discipline is freedom. Yeah.
Yeah, I go that along the way. 100%. Discipline is freedom. What's your go-to reset after a long day?
You mean the activity, or
Anything. What's the first thing that comes to mind?
I'm gonna take a walk. Yeah, that's definitely
Walks are good.
there is, yeah.
Mine's usually a long bike ride. What's a
Yeah, I
book
love bike
you've
rides.
Yeah, see? What's a book you've gifted more than once?
Games People Play by Eric Berne. Definitely
Yeah,
must read
it's a nice
for
book.
every leader.
Yeah, it's true. What's a tool or app you'd hate to lose?
My Whoop application. I'm
Ah, it's
addicted.
good. It is. Those things are. I'm thinking of getting myself one, to be honest.
Yeah, I
Right
highly recommend it. And Whoop needs to sponsor then the podcast, because then
there
we're
we
gonna
go.
promote it.
Let,
Yeah. Yeah.
let's make sure that happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's your most underrated skill?
My underrated skill, that I'm flexible. I can adapt to any circumstances.
Amazing, amazing. That's very clear. I'm going to remember that one.
Mhm.
What's something people often get wrong about you?
I think they sometimes perceive me being soft and substitute it for being quick,
Really?
which is quite opposite. Sometimes I'm too soft towards people, but I believe that this is a strength, because if you are soft, it means that you're strong. This is a different kind of paradox for me. Maybe, I'm not sure.
What's a small luxury you never skip?
Me time. It's luxurious. Me time. Having time to sit down with myself, take my notebook and reflect. That's the
Yeah.
luxury.
And last of all, what's one thing you're looking forward to in the next 90 days?
To finalize my research for the book.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. There you go. Yeah. Make sure that happens. Let me know how that
Yeah.
goes. So I absolutely
Thank
love
you.
that. So Susanna, where can people find you, follow your work and get into the safe challenger world of your,
I would welcome you on my LinkedIn and definitely connect. And YouTube. I'm really doubling down on this thing, which is a very vulnerable actually place to be, this YouTube. Yeah. So yeah, please subscribe and follow.
Yeah, amazing. And we'll include all of those links on the show notes as well. So please do connect with Susanna on LinkedIn and subscribe and follow her channel on YouTube. And last of all, before we wrap up completely, what's one thing you want a leader listening to this, to actually, who's listening to this, to actually do differently from tomorrow?
Stop thinking in opposites, meaning that you're now as a leader leading in the time of paradoxes. And yeah, face those paradoxes, allow that tension, allow that duality of things and try to reframe that for yourself, that this is actually a new skill for you to learn, not something to avoid or skate. So you can do that tomorrow already, yeah?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, be safe and also take the risk too
Yes,
by doing
exactly.
that. Yeah,
Exactly.
brilliant,
That's the
brilliant.
essence. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Susanna, for
Thank
being part of the
you.
show today. It's been such
It's
a
a
pleasure
pleasure.
having you.
Likewise. Thank you, Chad. Thank you.
Great stuff. And that's a wrap. Before you go, take a moment to think about what stayed with you from this conversation. Not what sounded impressive, but what challenged how you think, decide, or lead. See, leadership isn't something you wait for, it's something you practice internally, daily, and deliberately. And remember this, you can't lead a life that matters by following rules that don't. If this episode gave you perspective, share it with someone who's ready to take more control of how they lead and perform. And subscribe wherever you listen and keep redefining leadership on your own terms.